Brooke regarded herself in the bathroom mirror. She was flushed and disheveled. She held her breath and stood perfectly still. She knew that the smallest movement, even the merest thought, the nerves strung so tight they were like a corset, would feel overwhelming. She inhaled. Her nerves tingled. She heard the sound in her head. It was loud. She broke eye contact with herself and looked over her shoulder in the mirror to the bed. It was a mess. Her husband lay sprawled amongst the tangle of sheets. Brooke tilted her head, still watching him, and listened for sounds. Through the loud beating of her heart, the sounds came to her quietly, like waves on the evening breeze, slow, even breaths. Brooke smiled. She always did it the night before he was due to go away on business. She liked to make him happy and content before he left. She enjoyed feeling a special kind of connection with him in the days after their encounters. The emptiness, the longing, it was like carrying a piece of him around with her. And that was important. It heightened her excitement, her desire to still feel him while she engaged in friendly conversations with other men, while she played with words. Brooke returned her full attention to her reflection. She was amazed. Other than the dilation of her pupils and the flush to her cheeks, she looked the same. The same as she always had. Hair, dark and shiny, just brushing her shoulders. Glossy waves that framed her face, dark eyes, thick lashes, defined eyebrows, full lips and high cheekbones, attractive, striking. Somehow Brooke expected her thoughts to be visible, there in her eyes, on her skin. She raised her hand and pressed her fingers to her cheek. She felt the smoothness of her skin. Her nerves quivered and pulsed. The excitement made her feel sick. It was like first love, like when the anticipation of seeing your lover is almost unbearable. Nervous and sick and excited all at once, emotions swirling, alive, soaring, like that first thrill when the adrenaline rushes through your veins. A rush, an addictive rush. It had been so long since she'd felt this rush. It had been 5 years since she last felt this way. Last time she became careless. Last time she lost perspective and her husband found out and she caused him pain. She'd almost lost him. It had taken years to regain his trust. She wouldn't let that happen this time. This time she'd be more cautious, more discreet. Brooke smiled at herself in the mirror. Thank you, Ashley Madison, for providing people like me with a safe place to meet like-minded individuals. Brooke closed her eyes and pictured her conversation partner. He was handsome, attractive, reminiscent of her husband, a little darker, a little more rugged, and a whole lot more thrilling. She loved it. Loved the feeling, the fear, the anticipation, the possibility of being discovered, embracing the forbidden, all of it. She felt like a different person, ready to explore her deepest desires. Brooke was so glad her soon-to-be lover had been patient, that he took the time to understand her doubts, to win her over. It was going to make their encounter all the more special. If daring could be special, if intriguing could be special. The hunter thanked the gods once again for Ashley Madison. It made selecting his prey just so predictable. When your target are unfaithful wives, where else would you go except the biggest, most adventurous dating website for cheaters? He reviewed the profiles of the 3 ladies he was currently following. All fit his criteria: brown hair that barely skimmed their shoulders, dark eyes, curvy hips, rounded legs. Just his type. The hunter wondered which of the 3 would be the first to give in to their desires and thus become his 6th victim. Number 5 had been only 2 weeks ago, but already he felt the urge to witness the fear in their eyes as he choked the life out of them. He took a sip of his drink, savoring the taste as he tried to guess which lady it would be. Would it be the one going by the name Karen? She seemed eager. He suspected she had done this before. Not even an hour ago, he had allowed her to see his photo. Well, it wasn't his photo exactly. It was of someone better looking, more rugged. By the time she realized the truth, it would be too late. Much too late. During their early conversations, he let the potential cheater lead the way. The decision to cheat had to be theirs. Once that choice was made, he would try to guide them toward his preferred outcome, a secret meeting at their house. While their husband was away, of course. He loved the irony of that scenario the most. The realization that they were meeting their end in their own home, rather than engaging in passionate affairs on their marital bed. Thrilling for him, less thrilling for the cheater. Unfortunately, he had only managed that once with his second target. What was her name? Susan. Sarah? It didn't matter. She was incredibly naive. She didn't even realize he wasn't the guy in the photos. He had left her lying on the bed while he retrieved a suitcase from his car in her garage. Then he checked each room to remove any trace of her online presence. First, he took her computer, followed by her tablet from the bedside table and her phone from the charger in the kitchen. He wanted to eliminate any electronic evidence of himself. No need to make it too easy for the police by providing them with a hard drive to analyze or a browser history to follow. They would find out about him when he was ready for them to know. He had hidden the suitcase back in the trunk before grabbing a bottle of cleaner, gloves, a garbage bag, and a small vacuum. Starting in the master bedroom, he changed the sheets, wiped everything down with cleaner, and rearranged the cheater's body. He cleaned glasses, vacuumed the floors and furniture, even the spots he hadn't touched. You could never be too cautious. 3 out of the other 4 targets hadn't been as clueless as the second one, but they hadn't been very smart either. Instead of meeting him in a public and neutral location, somewhere safe, they had come to his motel room like lambs to the slaughter, their judgment clouded by lust, driven wild with excitement at the thought of being treated roughly and having an inappropriate relationship with him. Yeah, right. His success rate with the Ashley Madison cheaters was better than most because he knew their secret. There were thousands of seemingly innocent wives out there who were proper and faithful to their husbands but craved a more wild side. By engaging with a stranger who wanted them only for a casual encounter, they could justify their desires as something they were forced into. And they didn't have to face the guy over breakfast the next morning. So how is that working out for you? 2 of the 3 had willingly walked into his dimly lit motel room, but one hesitated at the door and had to be subdued when she realized he looked different from the photos he had sent her. He used a fake name and paid in cash for the rooms, choosing a different motel for each target. He even disguised himself with a wig and padding under his shirt to look like someone else. He was meticulous about his precautions. And as always, there was the cleaning afterward to eliminate any traces of himself. The final target thought she was being clever by meeting in a neutral location. The foolish woman chose a dimly lit park at night. So naive. The hunter could only assume she, like the others, was too worried about someone from her good wife life recognizing her that she failed to see the danger she was putting herself in. Regardless of her motives, by the time she saw him clearly enough to realize she had been deceived, it was too late. Her body was found in the woods several days later. The hunter knew he had taken a risk with the 5th target. He should have let her go. It was much harder to control the environment when it wasn't confined by walls. But the hunger, the compulsion, had gotten the better of him. Each of his targets had used a false name, but they had all brought their purses with them, effectively giving him their true identities and addresses, and their house keys. A quick visit to ensure husbands were away gave him their incriminating phones, tablets, and computers. He thoroughly enjoyed keeping souvenirs. In a way, it was infuriating how ignorant those 5 had been and how predictable the 3 current targets were acting. The most likely next victim would be Karen, his most recent target, but it could also be Monica. He had been pursuing her for a couple of months now. She longed for romance, to pretend she didn't have control over her desires. It was too much to hope that Suzette, the one who called herself Creep Suzette, would be the next to fall. He had been observing her the longest, several months actually. She was a skilled flirt, attracting her victim, then pushing him away. Painting vivid, seductive pictures with her words. She kept teasing and making promises, assuring him that she just needed to make sure her husband wouldn't find out. Suzette had mentioned she wanted a long-term affair. She had a long list of fantasies she wanted to fulfill. She had described them in great detail. The question was, would her fantasies also entail having her lover in her marital bed when her husband was away? He believed the chance was high. What was it she had written? That's right, there's nothing quite like doing something adventurous in the marital bed. In the past, it had kept her excited for weeks afterward. The hunter anticipated the day when her lust would overpower her caution. The memories of past encounters heightened his present desire to levels that tempted him to abandon his carefully planned approach. The hunter closed his eyes and groaned, knowing that ridding the world of another cheater would bring him the same satisfaction as a shot of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Brooke looked in the mirror, not surprised to see her cheeks were flushed and her pupils dilated. She was excited. Very excited. Slowly, carefully, she pulled the delicate stockings up her legs, attaching them to the belt. She slipped her feet into the fancy high-heeled shoes. They were really high and uncomfortable but made her legs look really good. Brooke stood up, reaching down beside where she'd just been sitting, and clasped the long coat. She slipped her arms in and tightened the belt. The coat reached the middle of her lower leg, perfect for what she needed, covering her surprise for her lover, but showing her slender ankles. With one last glance in the mirror, confirming she looked fantastic, classy but hot, Brooke grabbed her bag and made her way to the garage. She glanced at her watch as she glanced at her watch as she went down the stairs. Good. She was on time. This was one date she didn't want to be late for. The universe was helping her date. Brooke decided traffic was light, the busy time having passed, and traffic lights green the whole way. She thanked the heavens for her GPS system, as she wasn't familiar with this part of town. Brooke smiled as she pulled into the driveway. Her lover had left the garage door open for her. How considerate. She pulled in beside his vehicle. Something gray and sleek looking, dark and dangerous like him. She liked it. The garage door came down as she checked her makeup one last time. Perfect. She looked perfect. She got out of her car, a smile on her face. Her heart pounded in anticipation. She felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She turned toward the sound of the internal door opening. The investigation DCI Burns parked his vehicle behind the police car and turned off the engine. He sat with his hands on the wheel, preparing himself. Despite 25 years on the force, 15 of those as a detective, crime scenes were still a challenge. The violence. The waste of life. Of lives cut short. The senselessness of it. The worst, of course, was when it involved children, but any evil death turned his stomach. It wasn't that he was squeamish. It was the unanswered questions. Even when a crime was solved and the perpetrator put behind bars, there were always unanswered questions. About the case. About the case. About the reasons. And then those that no one, not even the murderer, could answer. The ones regarding what the future of the victim might have been. Burns sighed. He wished he was still in bed with his wife, spooning behind her in the early hours of the morning he could see coming in through the gaps in the curtains. He loved listening to her slow, calm breaths as she slept. Their rhythm soothed him like nothing else. Kath was his anchor. She made sense of the madness that was his work world. Her and the kids. He'd been awake when the message came through. Short as it was, it still made his stomach drop. Another victim, he'd sworn under his breath. Cursed the killer. Cursed their lack of clues. Their lack of progress on the case. He hoped the latest victim would provide some leads. With one last deep breath, he brought his mind back to the present and reached across to the passenger seat and grabbed the tray of coffees and bag of pastries. The breakfast of champions. Outside the vehicle, he paused a moment, adjusting the coffees and pastries. He shivered, glad he'd worn a heavier coat. There was a chill in the air. He walked past a handful of officers walking in a grid in search of clues on his way to a log cabin nestled in a clearing. He didn't envy the searchers. The morning fog wouldn't be making their job any easier. He studied the cabin as he approached. It was small. Probably only a few rooms in size. Clearly a vacation home used to get away from the trappings of modern city life. He could see the door was open, and he could hear soft voices coming from inside. Another step, and he stood framed in the doorway. He surveyed the interior with a practiced eye. As he'd guessed, there were only 3 rooms, a combined kitchen-living area, a bedroom, and a bathroom. An officer was methodically searching each area, each so focused on their jobs that they didn't look around at his approach. In the living area, on a large, faded rug, he saw the legs of the victim. Her feet were bare. He couldn't see her head or torso. One of the 2 old but comfortable-looking armchairs blocked that view. Reg McDonald, the medical examiner, was taking photos. Burns disliked what was involved in the processing of a crime scene involving a death. The victim was examined, photographed, weighed, measured, and dissected. It seemed like a violation of the victim, a further indignity. But the dead are powerless, they have no voice, and only through the investigation of their remains lay the possibility of finding them justice. Burns stepped into the room. He went straight to a small dining table that doubled as a work surface for the kitchen and set down the tray of coffees and bag of pastries. Grabbing a coffee and pastry for himself, he made his way towards the victim. "Morning, Reg." Reg looked up and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, more one of greeting for a familiar colleague. "Morning, Alistair." DCI Burns returned the smile. "There's some for you too, when you're ready," he said, indicating his coffee and donut. "Thanks." "Ugh. I hate that smell, Reg." Enough to put a guy off his breakfast. Belying his words, Burns bit into his donut. Reg didn't need to know the combination of sugar and caffeine helped calm his stomach. You get used to it. How long do you reckon? Before you get used to the smell. Burns could see Reg was teasing him. "Ha ha ha ha, the body, time of death, you clown." Reg grinned. Dark humor was a coping mechanism many involved in crime scene investigation used. Hard to say, but based on decomposition, probably 10 to 12 days. "Any signs of assault?" "She's too decomposed." "I won't know until I get her to the lab and can do some tests." The two men fell silent. Burns sipped his coffee, grateful for the heat, and chewed on his donut. It was good. He'd have to make note of the bakery. He studied the scene. The woman's shoes were missing, but for the rest she seemed to be fully clothed. Her dark brown hair fanned about her head like a halo. A scarf, the probable murder weapon, remained around her throat, loose and looking harmless. That something so soft and even sensuous could be used so brutally amazed Burns. She looked posed, her arms and legs, the angle of her torso, but the fanning of the hair was all too perfect to be natural. Burns suspected she'd be like the previous victims, and that the tests on her skin and from under her fingernails would show she'd been wiped down with bleach. It was even possible that the dress she was wearing wasn't her own, that the killer had redressed her in something he'd brought with him. At least one husband of the previous victims had stated he'd never seen the outfit his wife was found in. Of course, it was also possible the victim had bought it herself unbeknownst to the husband. Questions. So many unanswered questions. A young, fresh-faced, uniformed constable hurried up to DCI Burns, interrupting his reverie. He was holding a sodden handbag. "Sir, we found this between the carport and the cabin." Out of habit, DCI Burns glanced at the constable's hands. "Good, you're wearing gloves. Carefully look inside, son. I bet there's still a purse in there, isn't there? Don't pull it out or even touch it." "But sir, if we look inside the purse, there may be identification of some sort." "Won't that help us confirm the identity of the victim?" "Yes, it would, but I want you to stop and think for a moment." Burns looked the constable in the eye. He liked mentoring the younger officers, just as he'd been mentored in his early days on the force. With any luck, the killer had a look inside too. We don't want to risk smudging a possible fingerprint or dislodging a hair, losing it on a gust of wind. "I see, sir." "Keys or phone?" "Not that I can see, sir. Didn't think so." DCI Burns sighed. "Bag it and get it to forensics." The young constable nodded. He was in awe of DCI Burns, who had a reputation of being a bloodhound. He wanted to learn all he could from him. "What are you thinking, sir?" "Even without seeing what's in her purse, I'm thinking this lady here is Monica Smith. It's her car, and she fits the description. Her husband reported her missing on the 10th. He came back from a golfing weekend to find his wife and the family computer missing. Then why did it take 12 days to find her? This cabin belongs to a cousin of hers. Husband didn't think of it as they've only visited it twice in the last 5 years. According to hubby, wife wasn't much into camping and roughing it, and the cottage, as you can see, is isolated and pretty basic. We only found out about this place at dawn this morning when the neighbor, who arrived late last night, got up early to go fishing and noticed the same car parked here as last weekend. He didn't recognize the vehicle as belonging to the owners. Apparently, the owners usually let him know if they're lending the cabin out to family or friends, so thinking it might be someone who didn't have permission, he trotted over and found the door open. All three men looked down at the pathetic remains of what they were confident was Monica Smith. "The strangler again, sir?" asked the constable. DCI Burns nodded sadly. "It certainly looks like it." No matter how many crime scenes he'd attended, the sight of a life taken violently still affected him deeply. It was his sense of justice that had led him to the police force in the first place. Doesn't he normally dump the bodies in the bush somewhere? There's an assumption there that the killer is a he, Constable. The constable reddened and DCI Burns took pity on him. This was probably the young man's first murder scene and most definitely his first serial murder case. But that's a pretty safe bet, son. To answer your question, we know of 6 victims. 5 from within 150 kilometers of here and another one from Melbourne. Only one was found in bushland. That was the last one, which is probably why you thought that was his modus operandi. But our guy is versatile, adapts to his surroundings. 3 were found in cheap motels, and 1 in her house. He looked up, his gaze once more scanning the interior of the small, rustic cottage. He noted the crime scene crew were still searching and dusting for prints, and now this one in her cousin's weekender. The one in Melbourne, are you sure it's the same person? Oh yes. You see, our clever friend takes the victim's phone and house keys after killing them, goes into their homes, probably after staking them out to see no one else is home, and removes all of their computer gear. What the heck for? Wouldn't that be a risk? Someone could see him. Yes, it is a risk, but so far he's gotten away with it. No one thus far remembers seeing anything or anyone unusual. We think he's taking all their computer gear because he's meeting his victims on the internet. In fact, I'm personally convinced he's meeting them on Ashley Madison. Why? I mean, why are you sure of that? DCI Burns was pleased with the constable's questions and curiosity. It reminded him of himself when he was fresh out of the academy. He made a mental note of the constable's name. He'd keep an eye on him. Thus far, we haven't been able to establish any obvious links between the victims. They didn't go to school together, work together, join the same clubs or gyms, or even work in the same industries. Nothing links them except their appearance. But if you look at all the things the victims do have in common, you'll see that they were all between the ages of 25 and 40. Every one of them was married with no children, and all died while their husbands were away for at least one night. Not only that, but none of them told anyone, not their husbands, or a colleague, friend, or neighbor, they were going anywhere or meeting anyone. That's unusual. What do you surmise from that, Constable? Sounds like they might have been cheating on their husbands, boss. Burns nodded, pleased. That's what I think too. So next step. If you don't want to risk being seen hooking up with someone at a bar or club, where would you find them? Online, sir. Maybe Ashley Madison or Tinder. DCI Burns nodded. My bet's on Ashley Madison. It's the biggest cheating wives website around and offers our person more chance to scope out his intended victims. So our killer meets cheating wives on the net, probably Ashley Madison, then after killing them, goes to their houses and lets himself in with their keys and swipes their computers. DCI Burns finished the constable's summary, thus erasing any electronic trail that might lead us to his identity. Heck, he probably even sends them pictures of himself. Otherwise, there's no way they'd ever trust him enough to meet him. He meets them somewhere, possibly where they were killed, but he may also have met them at a club or bar first. At this point, we don't know. But if you think he's meeting them through Ashley Madison, why doesn't he have relations with them? And why not just ask to see their records? Until we catch him, we can only surmise his motivations. And Constable, you think we haven't thought of contacting Ashley Madison? The constable blushed, embarrassed to be seemingly questioning his superior officer's methods. Burns continued, firstly, we don't have proof that's how he's finding his victims. It's just an educated guess. None of the victims was advertising the fact they were members. Second, they're an American website, so it's a more complicated procedure to get a court order to force them. Last, and by no means least, when we asked them nicely, they told us to go away and not invade their client's privacy. The sick individuals, exclaimed the constable, a deeper blush creeping up his throat. Excuse my language, sir. That's all right, son. Sick, degenerate individuals just about covers it in my book as well.